hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation.
Excuse me? What? Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation? What the fuck is he talking about? Is he denying that misinformation and disinformation exists?
And trust me, I say this with all humor. If American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
Yeah, a high school student has the same amount of power to destroy democracy as literally the richest person in the history of humanity who is in the most powerful position in the US government after only the president himself. I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. I resign. I'm just gonna stop my channel tomorrow. I can't deal with this. This is too much.
Well, thank you, and thanks to all the gathered delegates and luminaries and media professionals, and thanks especially to the host of the Munich Security Conference for being able to put on such an incredible event. We're, of course, thrilled to be here. We're happy to be here. And, you know, one of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And, you know, it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, you know, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality.
I'm not gonna lie, I'm more surprised Trump even bothered sending Vance and not President Musk.
Of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's.
You know why he sent Vance and not Musk? Because Musk is actually busy doing shit in the US. He's busy dismantling the government. And Vance doesn't really have a job. Like, vice presidents famously don't really do anything. They only do symbolic stuff. They're only there for like photo ops and stuff like that. So yeah, I mean, he was bored. He didn't have anything to do. And probably Trump didn't even think of sending him here. It was probably Vance who was like, hey, do you need me on Tuesday? Because I can go there instead, you know? I don't know if it was Tuesday, but whatever.
Horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you. We're praying for you, and we will.
Yeah, for context, earlier that day or the day before, there was a car ramming attack that hurt like 20 people, killed 2, I think, at this point. Apparently, the suspect is an Afghan asylum seeker. Just, yeah, not good. So that happening a few days before the election is going to be a huge boost for the AfD. Wonderful. It's almost like it was planned, but like, I'm not saying I believe it was planned. It's just very convenient.
Certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, and we also believe that it's important in the
reasonable settlement being exactly what Russia has been asking for the past few years. Like, they're literally going to do all of the Russia wish lists and none of Ukraine's wish lists.
Coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe.
The threat from within being the term that Trump used to describe the Democrats in the U.S. as well. Interesting.
From some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election.
Seriously? So the election that was nearly stolen by Russia through a massive psyop and like huge amounts of resources that were spent on boosting this candidate who was a nobody before the election. And that is like concerning that, the Romania tried to defend its democracy against a foreign attack.
He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And
I mean, you can make the argument that we need just to make elections more secure, and we need to have more robust systems to prevent what basically happened in Romania. But I'm sorry, yeah, if your election was attacked, if your election integrity was compromised, and there is actually a like documented, proven foreign attack by a foreign country on your election, it is a completely valid thing to go like, hey, you know what? We're going to fix this and we need to do a redo because that's not okay. Obviously.
I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe that we are on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values. We must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider
like the
right side now in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued.
Oh my God. He's not even talking about World War II. He's talking about the communists. He's not even like, am I crazy that is a weird thing to point out? Am I crazy that the fact that he's talking about the Cold War and not World War II is a really weird thing?
Nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have...
Yeah, I'm sorry, you can't mandate innovation, bitch. How did y'all fly to the moon? That is one thing. I'm more... So I don't know if I'm just seeing something that isn't there. Let me go back there. So I don't know if I'm seeing something that isn't there. Maybe I'm just a little bit too plugged into these things, so I make connections that aren't necessarily the best.
Sometimes not so clear what happened, and we believe. Turns out you can't mandate mistakes to invent, to build. Blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation.
That thing of like inventing and building stuff really reminds me of this speech by neo-Nazi Richard Spencer.
To be white is to be a striver, a crusader, an explorer, and a conqueror. We build, we produce, we go upward. And we recognize the central lie of American race relations.
And that's something that I see in a lot of neo-Nazi speeches. That what was her name? Eva Vlandingerbroek, the Dutch, basically neo-Nazi, Nazi Barbie, I called her. We reacted to a speech of her a few months ago, and she made almost exactly the same point. Oh yeah, it's white Europeans, it's white Christian Europeans that build and invent and go upwards, you know. So this isn't formulated the same way. It might be completely like just me reading into this, but it sounds a little weird how close it was to me. Like, I don't know, you tell me if I'm crazy on that or not.
Or creativity, just as you can't force people what.
I don't think it's a dog whistle, just probably a coincidence. Yeah, very, very possibly that I'm that I'm making a connection that isn't really there. Are you talking about Eva Vlardingerbroek? Yeah, we saw a very similar comments by Eva Vlardingerbroek in the speech she made at CPAC Hungary a few months ago, a year ago, something like that.
To think, what to feel, or what to believe, and we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what happened to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where
wait, it's Eva Vlardingerbroek, not Vlandarborek. Wait, is that a thing? Eva Vlandar. Yeah, that's not a thing, right? I mean, this person. Unpronounceable Dutch name, of course.
Police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet.
Wait, what's this thing?
Police have carried out raids, warned citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action.
I'd like to see more context about that. What is this story? German police conducts raid against people suspected of posting misogynistic hate speech online. What kind of misogynistic hate speech? So carried out raids against people suspected of posting hate speech as part of a coordinated push to shine a spotlight on violence against women. Interrogated 45 suspects in 11 states early Thursday. None of the suspects were detained. Another 37 suspects were already searched and interrogated in previous weeks and months. The raid were part of a combating misogyny online, which, you know, maybe there needs to be something done about the levels of misogyny online. I don't know if police raids are the best solution, but like maybe there does need to be something done about that. And if social media companies are not going to enforce hate speech violations, like hate speech terms of service, then, you know, okay. We're observing how online platforms are increasingly becoming the scene of hate, harassment, and discrimination, also targeting especially women. Today's day of action makes it clear we consciously go into the spaces of hate, identify acts and perpetrators, and take them out of their anonymity and bring them to accountability, okay? What kind of hate speech was it, though? Because if it was like rape threats or death threats, that is completely valid. Shouldn't there be hundreds of raids every day then? I'm not saying that raids are necessarily the solution, but for example, there's a French streamer there's a trial going on right now of a French streamer, and I think 3 out of 4 of the people accused of harassing her got prison sentences. Like, yeah, if the hate speech is bad enough, if the harassment is bad enough, if it's like, you know, constant rape threats and stuff, there should be legal consequences for that. I'm not saying that someone saying, oh, go back to the kitchen needs to have like their door busted down by police. But if it's like, you know, you send a rape threat and a couple of days later, police knock on your door and say, what the fuck was that? And like try to assess if it was a real threat or not. Maybe that would not necessarily be a bad thing in terms of making people think twice about what they post online. especially because in this case, none of the suspects were detained.
To Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge...
Yeah, I'm not a fan of controversial opinion. I wouldn't, I'm not going to go out and burn a Koran myself, but I do think that that should be part of protected free speech. I do think you should have the right to blaspheme in secular countries and democracies in general. I don't like that we're going after people for criticizing religions, even in ways that we disagree of. There's a difference between that and actually like being racist or being xenophobic and targeting people. Oh, cat coughing.
Judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws to supposedly protect free expression.
As a Muslim, burnings are very disrespectful, but giving these people media police attention is the reason they do it. That is true. And like, I agree that it's disrespectful, which is why I wouldn't do it. But in the same way that, I think you should be allowed to go like spit on a church or something. If you go like inside the church, or if you like tag the outside of the church and do damage to the church, that's a different thing. But like the book itself is different from like the mosque. If you vandalize a mosque, that is different. But I don't know. There's a piece of art. What is it? It's called Piss Christ. Piss Christ. That is very controversial for Christians. That is literally, Jesus in a vat of piss. And I'm sorry, I don't have a problem with it. Like, I think democracies should have the freedom to be very disrespectful. Like, there's a limit between being disrespectful and actually engaging in hate speech and encouraging violence against people, which is where I draw the line personally. And, I think I know that people will have different... what about ex-Muslims burning the Quran? Yeah, no, I think that should be something that is acceptable. I know that there are different lines between what people find to be like where they put the line on what is acceptable free speech, like what is acceptable offensive free speech. But I personally, and maybe this is because I was, partly raised in the US, partly raised in like US influenced culture over my life, that I put the line, I placed the bar pretty high on that. I don't think I'm no longer a free speech absolutist like I used to be. I do think that having some enforcements of any kind of advocacy for violence, any kind of even things that will likely lead to violence need to be dealt with in before they become a bigger problem. But and I think that I'm not a free speech absolutist in the sense of we should be able to say anything on social media and not have any consequences for that either. Like, social media should have terms of service, and they should be enforcing those terms of service with the good of their community online as their priority, and having a healthy online community that doesn't, where you don't get like, you receive death threats, and when you report the death threats, you get a message saying, oh, sorry, that wasn't a violation of our terms of service, which is like literally that happened to me a few times. Like, when I report a threat that I get and they go like, this doesn't go against our community guidelines, like, fuck off. No, that shouldn't be okay. But yeah, I don't know. And okay, I think Quran burnings should be okay, but if someone burns a Quran and posts a video of that online as a way to get attention, I think it's totally fine for that video to be taken down. But I don't think that person should have legal consequences and be fined or jailed or something like that for doing the Quran burning. That's what I would place it as.
Do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago...
I agree. The religious liberties of Muslim British people are really at risk when their mosques are being attacked after a mass stabbing that didn't even involve a Muslim person.
A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes.
I do think that some of the UK's laws when it comes to free speech and political protest are quite insane. And part of the manifestation that we're seeing of that is the batshit crazy prison sentences that they're handing out for environmental protesters. But that also applies to other things, like even protests that I disagree with. Like if his description of this event is true, I do think that goes too far. But yeah, no, generally speaking, the UK has pretty insane rules when it comes to political speech and political protesting that I mostly disagree with, and that I don't think are like the EU doesn't have anything that drastic in Western Europe at least.
Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently.
Yeah, exactly. When the worst person makes a great point, but for the entirely wrong reason. Exactly.
Praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the.
Yeah, I'm very skeptical of this description. Let's look into it, since Tryon is pointing out that that's not what happened. Okay, maybe this will address it. JD Vance described as extremist over attack on UK abortion clinic safe zones. US Vice President's comments, part of a wide-ranging tirade against Europe, called inaccurate and misogynistic. What is the inaccuracy? Heidi Stewart, the chief executive of BPAS, I don't know what BPAS is, the UK's leading provider of abortion services, said safe zones, buffer areas of 150 meters around clinics designed to stop women from being harassed, with leaflets showing pictures of fetuses having to pass by vigils, were vital to protect women's access to essential health care in an overwhelmingly pro-choice country. Can we actually have the debunk of what Vance said? She accused Vance of calling, so this is Labour MP Stella Creasy. She accused Vance of calling for the right to harass women having an abortion because our bodies are their battleground, our human rights their targets. Okay, but that's not really addressing the inaccuracy. I guess it will hopefully be in this article here if we don't have it in the one we're reading. In Vance's speech at the Munich Security Conference, he said the UK had placed the basic liberties of Britons in the crosshairs, of religious Britons in the crosshairs, citing the prosecution of Adam Smith Connor, a physiotherapist and army veteran. Vance said he had been charged with, okay, we just heard what he said. Connor Smith, who is receiving legal support from Alliance Defending Freedom International, a conservative Christian legal advocacy group in the US, was convicted of breaching a safe zone in October last year after refusing to repeated requests to move away from outside an abortion clinic. Okay, that is very different. So police asked him to move. They told him, hey, you can go do this outside of the safe zone around the clinic. And he refused to do it. Again, I think the UK goes way too far in terms of what can and can't be done for political protest, but this is not an example that seems unreasonable to me. If they decided that, hey, abortion clinics are targets of insane levels of harassment and protest and trying to stop people from the right to get an abortion, it's completely reasonable to declare that there's a safe zone, and if there's a protest happening inside that safe zone, police get to say, hey, move past the limits, and then you can protest and do your stupid silent prayers if you want. Praying man breached abortion limit clinic safe zone. Okay. The 51-year-old from Southampton denied failing to comply with the order. But district judge blah, blah, blah said on Wednesday his actions had been deliberate. Okay. What is the denied failing to comply with the order? Does he mean that he did comply with the order? 2-year conditional discharge. The court was told he had been praying for his unborn son, who he said died from abortion 22 years ago. So it's the court that heard that he prayed for his unborn son, not the police at the moment of the arrest. If the police said, hey, move past the limits, and he doesn't, then I guess that's the law. They can arrest him for that. A community officer spoke to him for an hour and 40 minutes, asked him to leave, but he refused. Okay, that's pretty clear. Like this wouldn't be okay in the US. The US has laws where, like, if a police officer tells you to move and you don't, like, you, in a lot of cases, you have a right to stay. But if the UK has laws specifically around abortion clinics, like, this is a completely defensible approach. During the case brought by BCP counsel, the court hearing had a meeting with counsel the day before to inform it about his silent vigil. The court heard that he had emailed the counsel the day before to inform it about his silent vigil, as he had done on previous occasions. On the day he was asked to leave by a community officer, spoke with him for an hour and 40 minutes, but he refused. Yeah, okay. Well, if 75% of the residents in the area support the buffer zone, that's a democratic approach to things, I guess. Yeah, like, again, this completely unsurprising, but turns out JD Vance is basically lying about this whole thing, or presenting a wildly distorted version of the events.
Prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against...
Yeah, exactly. TLDR, he intended to be arrested and broke the law on purpose because his girlfriend had an abortion 22 years ago. He is the nut job here. Like, he emailed in advance saying, hey, I am going to violate the safe zone. Like, the fact that he emailed in advance saying that he was going to do that, and then police came and was like, hey, can you move beyond the limits? And he was like, no, fuck you, basically. And then he was arrested for that. That is, I mean, what you can argue, that is basically civil disobedience. But if it's civil disobedience in a kind of Rosa Parks kind of way, I guess, then admit it. Don't claim that it was like this poor guy who just happened to be praying for his dead son and had nothing, like, was not harming anyone. Like, no, he was doing civil disobedience. He was trying to get arrested to challenge the current laws. But, like, be honest about it. Don't lie about it by saying that it was something completely different.
A single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses...
Rosa Parks got arrested and convicted. Yeah, and that was the point. Like, that was the goal. You know, they weren't like, when they did that, what they said was like, hey, this arrest was like completely unreasonable, and like not the arrest itself, but like the laws need to change so that this doesn't happen. And that was a civil rights movement, but they didn't pretend like Rosa Parks didn't intend to do that. It was her activism. Like, that's what they were doing. It was a planned thing that they did. Own your activism, even if it's for evil. Yes, exactly.
Lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally,
excuse me, that sounds completely made up. What?
Had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person. But no, this last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law.
There's absolutely no way this is true. I do not believe him that prayer within the own homes of the people in that area would be breaking the law. That sounds completely made up. There's no way that's true. I don't even know what to Google for that.
Within their own homes, to citizens This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens.
Scottish government hits back that JD Vance's abortion claim. It sends out illegal prayer warning letters. Vance claimed the Scottish government told people they could be breaking the law by praying in their own homes. The Scottish government has told Yahoo News that US President JD Vance's claim is incorrect. Okay, we just saw what he says. He highlighted the case of blah, blah, blah. That was bullshit. He went on to claim this last October. Okay, we just saw this. In England, where the incident in, okay, this we already saw. In Scotland, buffer zones apply within 200 meters. Proponents of the safe access zones say women using a clinic can feel intimidated and distressed by the presence of someone standing in the air praying, even if they are not speaking. Critics argue the rule undermines the right to freedom of religion and free speech. A Scottish government spokesperson told Yahoo News that Vice President's claim is incorrect. Private prayer at home is not prohibited within safe access zones, and no letter has ever been suggested it was. I really want to know what letters he is talking about. Is he making up the letters, or did the letters say something completely different? And the letters are not mentioned for the rest of the article. Can someone help me find what these letters are? Is this just like fake news that circulated on conservative social media or something? People continue to have the right to free speech and to protest in free speech. However, no one has the right to harass women. Let's see. Let's try to search for its like Scotland letter abortion clinic prayer. Tools anytime. Boom. From October to, let's say, November 1st. Go. Christian news. Scottish Christians fear fines for praying at home near abortion clinics. Residents living in an area of Edinburgh within an abortion buffer zone say they're concerned that they may be criminals for praying in their homes. A letter from the Scottish government has now been sent to residents within Edinburgh's safe zones, saying that while the rules mainly apply to actions carried on public spaces such activities in private spaces or homes could be an offense if seen or heard within the zone. I would like to see that letter. And also, if it's like, okay, you are technically standing within your home, but you have a bullhorn sticking out the window, and that's how you're praying it. Like, yeah, that is not private prayer within your own home. That is different from private prayer within your own home. If you're doing a protest, if you're like if you're doing that kind of like finagling around the rules where it's like, I'm not in the streets, I'm in my home, I'm just like being a huge inconvenience from the inside of my home by being loud and screaming out the window in my form of protest, then obviously, yeah, that is a violation. Like the fact that you're technically standing inside your home doesn't make it not a public protest. If you pray within in your home, you may be liable for a criminal offense and subjected to a £10,000 fine. Yeah, I mean, yeah, if standing within the zone and praying silently in public does that, and like screaming out your window, like, yeah, that counts too. If it can be found that you were doing that on purpose to be a nuisance, then yeah, fuck off. Like to paint that as being a letter that is gonna criminalize private prayer within your own home, unbelievable lies. It's crazy how like nothing he says is true.
Whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer within their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizens suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I fear, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea...
This is just so you know, this is coming from an administration that has a list of banned words that cannot be included in scientific research now, and those words include bias, racism, gender, like so many other, like they have entire lists of words that cannot be included in new research that the government funds. And he's claiming that, yeah, the censorship is coming from the other side. They have, they're applying Project 2025. Project 2025 has a list of 3,000 books that they want to ban from school libraries. The level of dishonesty and bad faith here is off the charts.
That coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here.
We still don't know if that's the case. Were the reactions to disinformation on social did the anti-disinformation measures regarding COVID misfire in some cases? Yes, I think you can arguably say that they did, but like the level of misinformation was so insane that needing to, like, it was absolutely, literally can't research women. No, exactly, Janine. The fact that there was so much disinformation around COVID that they had to cast like kind of like a wide net, and unfortunately a bunch of like kind of reasonable discussions got caught in the crosshairs is true. And like, yeah, it's a good thing that they corrected that, but they did correct it after a while. But it's still not proven, and it might be true, but it's still not proven that it leaked from a lab. We don't know. Maybe we'll never know. It's entirely possible, but coming from an administration that has been in the name of free, like while touting their, support for free speech, have actually been some of the most censorious. Oh, by the way, they're also defunding schools for including any kind of discussion of gender in their classrooms, and calling students by their preferred gender and their preferred names. Defunded now by the government, in federal funding from the government. Yeah, they're not at all first free. Like they're the fact that they're claiming that it's first free speech is insane. Oh, and apparently YouTube is censoring Tryon. YouTube is still fucking with me, so here I am with the Discord workaround. But on the last statement, who gives a shit where the virus leaked? Yeah, no, I agree with that. From all you care, it leaked out of my bathroom. We should focus on curing it. Yeah, and I agree with that. The problem was indeed I think it's probably true that some reasonable discussion about the lab got censored. That shouldn't have been. But the intended targets of those censorship rules, of those like that push for like preventing people from talking about the China virus, or pushing for rhetoric that would encourage hate towards Asians. There was unbelievable violence against Asians during that time in the US and elsewhere. So a lot of the intents behind the rules were completely reasonable. The fact that they misfired and sometimes ended up banning some content, that's unfortunate, and it was corrected, and it wasn't a big deal. That is very different from, for example, now where it's literally becoming impossible to research anything to do with race or racism or women or gender or a bunch of other things in the US right now, which is crazy.
Here today, not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite. And I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington,
by exactly knowing where it was coming from and curing it would potentially been easier, though. Yes, but I don't think discussion on social media was helping people know where it was coming. Like, was helping, the authorities know where the virus was coming from. Like the investigation into where the virus came from, and people talking out of their ass and not knowing what they were talking about on social media are like two very different things. Again, I do think that there should be permissiveness to speculate on where the virus came from without that being immediately shut down as disinformation. But there's a difference between that and like being racist against China and whatever. I'm not saying like there wasn't an over enforcement of those rules, but it was also a crazy time. Like the pandemic of 2020 is going to remain one of the most significant events in modern history until more shit happens very soon, unfortunately. But yeah, no, it was a crazy time. Like, it was pretty insane. Oops.
There is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square.
As long as you're not trying to publish it in scientific documents, in scientific papers.
Disagree.
Or, as long as you're not a school employee. There's like 2 people applauding in the frame.
Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now,
oh my God. I mean, we already covered this extensively. So I was saying before, during, and after the election, oh, look, Trump is going to be super pro-Russia. And there were signs that maybe not. There were signs that maybe Trump had evolved in his position on Russia, and maybe he was going to be pushing back a little bit more against Vladimir Putin. I've seen no indication of that since they took office. So far, it's been either completely like not caring about what Russia does, or actually supporting Russia in doing it. And this is just like, okay, they're just going to pretend like Russia didn't try to steal a European election. They're just going to pretend that didn't happen.
As I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with.
I agree. And part of how you make it stronger is take action against an attack on your election by rerunning it and fixing the problem to begin with. Yeah, exactly. They weren't buying ads. They were running a massive psyop.
Now, the good news...
Jesus, did you hear the number of applause there? Because he knows he's lying. He knows this is bullshit. And the people at the Munich security conference are security experts. Like, they know this was a major attack on a European democracy that needed to be dealt with. There's like 2 people applauding in the entire room. Literally 2 people. You hear 2 separate applause there. There's only 2 people applauding.
Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating.
Yeah, it's his secretary and his wife. Yeah, good point. That was probably the case.
In these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea.
Excuse me? What? Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation? What the fuck is he talking about? Is he denying that misinformation and disinformation exists? Is this guy literally just a Russian asset? Literally just a Russian asset. Trying to pretend like there isn't misinformation and disinformation going around.
With an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way, or even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target.
I'm sorry, this is a security conference where they shouldn't be prepared to have one of their speakers openly criticize the fact that they took action against a major security threat in their country by a hostile foreign power.
And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact?
Democracy and human rights, the stuff that the US is actively trying to destroy.
That we all believe is so important. And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making.
I don't disagree with that. Fascism is a crisis of our own making.
If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need...
No one cares about you, man. No one elected you. They didn't care that you were on the ballot. It's Trump and Musk at this point. You're just a background player.
Need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. Have we learned nothing that thin mandates produce unstable results? But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course, we know that very well in America. You cannot win a democratic mandate by censoring your opponents or putting them in jail, whether that's the leader of the opposition, a humble Christian praying in her own home, or a journalist trying to report the news.
Where's this journalist trying to report the news thing coming from? Did he bring that up as another anecdote that he was super dishonest about? Or is this coming out of nowhere because it's the whole thing about disinformation that he just literally doesn't believe disinformation exists, apparently?
Nor can you win one by disregarding your basic electorate on questions like who gets to be a part of our shared society. And of all the pressing challenges that the nations represented here face, I believe there is nothing more urgent than mass migration. Today, almost 1 in 5 people living in this country moved here from abroad. That is, of course, an all-time high. It's a similar number, by the way, in the United States, also an all-time high. The number of immigrants who entered the EU from non-EU countries doubled between 2021 and 2022 alone, and of course, it's gotten much higher since. And we know the situation, it didn't materialize in a vacuum. It's a result.
Wait. If the next words he's about to say aren't of the war in Ukraine, then I don't even know what the fuck. Between 2021 and 2022, what possibly happened in 2022 that a bunch of people from outside the EU entered the EU? I don't know. What possibly could it have been?
Of a series of conscious decisions made by politicians
in Russia. What?
all over the continent and others across the world over the span of a decade. We saw the horrors wrought by these decisions yesterday in this very city. And of course, I can't bring it up again without thinking about the terrible victims who had a beautiful winter day in Munich ruined. Our thoughts and prayers are
and also, yeah, of course, the results of the wars in the Middle East. But that's been something that's been happening from 2015. It's been happening for 10 years. The difference between 2021 and 2022 is not the Mediterranean migrant crisis. It's the war in Ukraine. I mean, what the fuck? I mean, seriously, obviously, what the fuck?
Them and will remain with them. But why did this happen in the first place? It's a terrible story, but it's one we've heard way too many times in Europe and unfortunately too many times in the United States as well.
That European and North American powers, mostly the United States, destabilize the world and create conditions for migrants and refugees to need to find other places to go. Yes, that is unfortunately something that we've heard a lot of places happen in a lot of places all around the world. But like the case of between 2021 and 2022 is Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Like, that is just so unbelievably obvious.
An asylum seeker, often a young man in his mid-20s, already known to police, rams a car into a crowd and shatters a community.
Yeah, I agree that sucks. I agree that there needs to be better screening of those, we need to do a better job of trying to prevent that from happening. But that doesn't mean mass deportations of every single refugee in the continent. That is not a solution. You know, mass deporting millions of people who are genuine refugees fleeing from horrible conditions and wars and famines and horrible geopolitical situations from all over the world is not a solution to a few dozen attacks that happen to be happening from minorities that are like massively amplified by right-wing media, when similar attacks happening by white people, by non-refugees, are just completely silent and don't get headlines anywhere because, like, yes, crimes happen sometimes. It is bad when they happen. It is bad when they happen and they're done by asylum seekers. It's bad when they happen when they're done by other people. But that is not a reason to mass deport like millions of people from the continent. It's like the reality is they don't really care about the attacks. They just want an excuse to justify the mass deportation of refugees from the continent.
How many times must we suffer these appalling setbacks before we change course and take our shared civilization in a new direction?
If all that terrorists do is ram cars into people, that is security working, lest I remind you that Paris used to explode weekly a decade ago. Yeah, actually, there's even crazier things that happened in Europe long before the refugee crisis. Like there were like massive terrorist attacks in when was this? When was the Shah of Iran? When did he get pushed out of power? Okay, until 79. So it was the 79 revolution. In like the early 80s, there were massive terrorist attacks organized by Iran in Paris that killed way more people, like not as many people as like the November attacks in at the Bataclan and all of that, but like terrorist attacks in Europe didn't start with the refugee crisis, and it is not the fault of the refugees that they happened. And also, like, yeah, we had massive terrorism in the UK during the Troubles. There was massive terrorism in Spain with ETA. The idea that violence just like magically started out of nowhere because of refugees and the continent was so peaceful before 2015 is a lie. That is not true. That is not the case. That is just lying. It is just painting a fake reality to justify the mass deportation of refugees.
No voter on this continent went to the ballot box to open the floodgates to millions of unvetted immigrants. But you know what they did vote for? In England, they voted for Brexit, and agree or disagree, they voted for it. And more all over Europe, they're voting for political leaders who promise to put an end to out-of-control migration. Now, I happen to agree with a lot of these concerns, but you don't have to agree with me. I just think that people care about their homes, they care about their dreams, they care about their safety and their capacity to provide for themselves and their children. And they're smart. I think this is one of the most important things I've learned in my brief time in politics. Contrary to what you might hear a couple mountains over in Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored.
Jesus, oh my God, this is a neo-Nazi talking point that's barely disguised. the interchangeable cogs of an economy is a neo-Nazi talking point that was very hardly hit on, like hit on very strongly by what's his name, that Nazi comedian guy, Sam Hyde. Yeah, this is a barely disguised Nazi talking point. I can't get into it right now. I'll probably get into it at some other point. But the idea of like this, we're not interchangeable cogs of an economy. Davos mentioned as well, that's another thing, but the idea of we're not interchangeable cogs of an economy is also what the neo-Nazis were saying around the H-1B visa controversy that Elon Musk kickstarted a few weeks ago. It is a way of saying, no, you can't fire me and hire a foreigner from India to replace me because like that, maybe economically that works, but that's going to break down the foundations of society or whatever. Like that is the kind of xenophobic and racist, like white nationalist kind of propaganda that they use. This is said in a much more subtle way where it doesn't sound like the same thing, but like it really it is a very veiled reference to that. Use propaganda to change people's minds about migration, then use people's changed minds. Exactly, yeah. Use propaganda to change people's minds about migration, then use people's changed minds to justify propaganda talking points as the will of the people. That's exactly true. That is, I hadn't thought of it that way, but it is completely unbelievably true what you just said. Yeah, it's a chicken and egg thing with these talking points. That is such a good point that I'm definitely going to steal in a future script.
In Davos, the citizens of all of our nations don't generally think of themselves as educated animals or as interchangeable cogs of a global economy. And it's hardly surprising that they don't want to be shuffled about or relentlessly ignored by their leaders. And it is the business of democracy to adjudicate these big questions at the ballot box. I believe that dismissing people, dismissing their concerns, or worse yet, shutting down media, shutting down elections, or shutting people.
Yeah, but like, if those concerns are only based on right-wing media that is dishonestly presenting the facts, and then yes, you can dismiss those concerns. I think we need to do more to address the disinformation. And just banning the disinformation isn't enough. Like there needs to be better systems of information to try to debunk these. But it's kind of it's an almost impossible task because it's kind of like disinformation is kind of like starting half a dozen little fires in different parts of the country, and then expecting it to be the same amount of work to go put out those fires. But like those fires spread, and now you have a huge amount of work to put out what, only took a few minutes to start,
People out of the political process protects nothing. In fact, it is the most surefire way to destroy democracy. And speaking up and expressing
the most surefire way to destroy democracy is to elect a fascist like they did in the US.
Opinions isn't election interference, even when people express views outside your own country, and even when those people are very influential. And trust me, I say this with all humor, if American democracy can survive 10 years of Greta Thunberg scolding, you guys can survive a few months of Elon Musk.
Yeah. A high school student has the same amount of power to destroy democracy as literally the richest person in the history of humanity who is in the most powerful position in the US government after only the president himself. Yes, those are the same thing. Oh my God, that is like the best analogy ever. I can't believe he was able to make that argument. That is such a good point. What the fuck is this speech? I send help. I don't know. What the fuck was that point? What? Oh my God, I can't. I'm done with this. I can't do this anymore. I resign. I'm just gonna stop my channel tomorrow. I can't deal with this. This is too much. That killed me. I'm done. Honestly, exe has stopped working. Usall.exe has stopped working. I am so like, I can't even, my brain cannot process the unfathomable stupidity of that. That is just out of this world.
But what German democracy, what no democracy, American, German, or European, will survive is telling millions of voters that their thoughts and concerns, their aspirations, their pleas for relief are invalid or unworthy of even being considered. Democracy rests on the sacred principle that
This guy's like, I can't fucking believe what this speech is saying. This is unbelievable.
valid
Look at that,
or
look at that
unworthy
guy.
of even being considered. Democracy
He's like, I mean, are you fucking serious? Like, are you kidding me right now?
rests on the sacred principle that the voice of the people matters. There's no room for firewalls. You either uphold the principle or you
Oh, this is the German firewall. He's saying there's no room for firewalls that where democratic parties put a firewall between themselves and fascist parties like the AfD. That's the name of the German firewall that they have that says, oh, no party that's democratic should ally with the AfD. And they call that the firewall. He's saying, oh, there's no room for that because he wants to usher in fascism in Europe. That is that clear. The AfD is a neo-Nazi party. It is explicitly a neo-Nazi party that uses barely hidden neo-Nazi symbolism in its communication, and that is allying with other neo-Nazis all over the world. It is a neo-Nazi party. And she's saying, oh yeah, it's anti-democratic to have a firewall that against you working with them. No, I'm sorry. No, fuck off.
don't. Europeans, the people, have a voice. European leaders have a choice. And my strong belief is that we do not need to be afraid of the future. You can embrace what your people tell you, even when it's surprising, even when you don't agree. And if you do so, you can face the future with certainty and with confidence, knowing that the nation stands behind each of you. And that, to me, is the great magic of democracy. It's not in these stone buildings or beautiful hotels. It's not even in the great institutions that we have built together as a shared society. To believe in democracy is to understand that each of our citizens has wisdom and has a voice. And if we refuse to listen to that voice, even our most successful fights will secure very little. As Pope John Paul II, in my view, one of the most extraordinary champions of democracy on this continent or any other, once said, do not be afraid. We shouldn't be afraid of our people, even when they express views that disagree with their leadership. Thank you all.
Just let me check something. Yeah, he was Pope between 78 and 2005. So during the end of the Cold War and then during some of the most peaceful times in human history. So yes, it is a different situation to be in favor of, more radical free speech absolutism in those times than it is now when fascism is on the rise again.
Good luck to all of you. God bless you.
Honestly, okay, what I'll say is what I heard from this speech elsewhere was way more doomer than what I expected this speech to be way worse in a lot of ways. It was mostly just incredibly stupid and incredibly bad faith, but nothing too surprising coming from a fascist administration in the US. I think the people who've been warning me about this speech is more like realizing how bad the administration are in the US, which I had already fully realized, I guess. I'm more just baffled by that Greta Thunberg comparison thing, which is just like, I'm just broken by that completely. Anyway, yeah, that was quite something. My brain is still completely fucked by that Elon Musk Greta Thunberg comparison. I am struggling to recover from that.
Don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed this video. You can follow the main Barely Informed channel at youtube.com/@barelyinfo and follow this channel for live streams every week.